It's good to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's what Millsy. Back with the Hometown Commander. Back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew the Magic world. And as always, the deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. Today, we're soldiering on through our Murders at Karlov Manor content and looking at a new Gruul commander. And of course, if you know anything about me, you know I love my Gruul commanders, and Anzrag is no exception to that rule. Anzrag the Quake-Mole is a 4-mana, 8/4 legendary mole god. Whenever it becomes block, we untap each creature we control. After this combat, there's additional combat. And for 7 mana, Anzrag must be blocked each combat this turn, if able. So there's a lot we can read in from Anzrag, but I think a couple things we want to keep in mind is this. Anzrag, if it becomes blocked, gives us an additional combat. So if we can get it to be blocked, we'll automatically go up to 2 combats, and if we can do that multiple times, or if we can manipulate it out somehow, that's going to be pretty great. Now, Anzrag has a 7-mana ability that does that, but we have spells that'll actually do this for cheaper. And I think that's one of the ways that we're going to try to use our deck to take advantage of this. Now, I know what you may be thinking was Anzrag's an 8/4, and it's not going to take very many blocks to kill it. So the other thing we need to do is try to make it indestructible, make it hard to kill, give it trample, manipulate its power, make it big any way we can to specifically trample over our opponents, but also make defending and blocking Anzrag a nightmare. I think what we'll talk about first is how we're going to protect Anzrag or make it bigger. Then we'll talk about how we're going to get it to have to be blocked. And then we'll talk about some of the creatures we might want to put down alongside Anzrag as we go through these combats to punish our opponents. Okay, so making Anzrag bigger is actually pretty easy in Gruul colors, considering we have a lot of spells that can do it. I think the classic one, and probably one of my favorite Gruul commanders of all time, in Xenagos God of Rebels, is a great one for this. Giving Anzrag +X/+X and haste until another turn where it's his power, meaning Anzrag is going to go up to a 16/12 that we just need to get trample on to become very difficult to deal with. Zopendrel doubles each creature's power and toughness at the beginning of each combat, and that's important because for the purposes of what we're trying to do, if we're trying to go through multiple combats, which I will warn you what the deck's trying to do, Anzrag's going to keep getting bigger and bigger and potentially start threatening the game if no one has a better plan to stop it. We're playing things like the Skullspore Nexus, so we can tap to double its power until end of turn. And we're playing lots of things to give it trample. Garruk's Uprising is just one of many that we can use to give it trample. We have things like Ember Cleave to give it double strike and trample, and to make it hit even harder. Now, there's plenty of these effects in the deck, giving it double strike or trample or +3/+3 or whatever it may have you. There's plenty of those abilities in the deck. I'm not going to go through all of them. Let's talk about protecting Anzrag or making it have to be blocked. First off, we'll talk about things like Darksteel Plate and Mithril Coat, making it indestructible, and meaning that no one can just chump block it and kill it. We also have things like Dolmen Gate to prevent all damage dealt to it in combat, which is equally just as good because then we have no risk of it dying in that combat. Things like Tamiyo's Safekeeping, Mortal's Resolve. These green instants are going to give that creature indestructible or give Anzrag indestructible, meaning he can swing as many times as we want it to for big effect. Now, as far as forcing to be blocked, there's plenty of choices. We have things like Roar of Challenge, forcing all creatures able to block target creature this turn to do so. This is probably going to be one of our favorite spells to pair with multiple combats because it's going to force every creature the person we're attacking with Anzrag to block Anzrag, meaning that the rest of our creatures are going to get through for free on that person and going to allow us to really gain these multiple combats. We have things like Compelled Duel, +3/+3 and must be blocked. Irresistible Prey, just straight up must be blocked, draw a card. King's Herald Revenge, +1/+1 trample and must be blocked this turn. And as you can see, some of these effects were, again, must be blocked to give it trample, or things like Terrifying Presence that are just going to prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by creatures other than target creature this turn. You know, stopping anything from damaging Anzrag as it gets in and swings. So, okay, I think it's not going to be very hard to figure out how first to do that. We have 1 and 2 creatures that kind of do it. Neath the Dire Hunt a card I've always loved in the past. It says at the end of combat, we can pay 2 in either red or green. If we do, we double target creature's power until end turn. That creature must be blocked this turn if able, giving us that option to go through and force someone to block in. And then something like Stonehoof Chieftain, giving another creature trample and indestructible when it attacks. That'll actually help all of our creatures, including some of the other big beaters we're going to use to attack. As far as more than one combats go, we have things like Relentless Assault, but I think cards like Morog, Fury Raccoon, giving us another combat every time a land comes in, Karlach automatically giving us another combat every turn, as well as the shenanigans we can do around Aggravated Assault. Enchantment lets us for 5 mana take another combat. We could pair that with a lot of things to get us that extra mana, but one of my favorites, at least in this deck, is something like Savage Ventmaul, which gives us 6 mana every time it attacks, just enough mana to then pay for Aggravated Assault. But I think if we have the right setup, we can use things like Savala, Heart of the Wilds, or other creatures that tap for multiple mana to pay for that as well. So it's not like we're just relying on Savage Ventmaul. We have plenty of ways to do this, and in fact, towards the later turns, we may have enough mana to just pay for Aggravated Assault outright, once or twice, depending on where we're at in the game. As far as our other creatures go, we do have some other creatures that are going to become good attackers for us. We did talk about both Xenagos and Zopandrel, who are going to be slacks in their own right when it comes to combat. We're playing things like Galta, 12-12 with Trample. Both the Talis are pretty great in combat. Both have their own great abilities, but are pretty big and going to threaten to hurt our opponents. Ilharg the Razeborn can put a creature from our hand tapped and attacking, and that's pretty great, specifically for things like Galta and Atali. Primal Conqueror and not Primal Storm, because they're big attackers that are just going to come in and then bounce back to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. Now, the bad part is they don't get haste, so if we're taking the extra combats, they won't be able to attack unless we use something like Rhythm of the Wild or things like that to give it haste. But again, Ilharg will have the ability for us to just throw things in, tapped and attacking for good damage. We got creatures like General Marhol, El's Dragon. Says whenever a creature we control becomes block, it's +3/+3 until end turn for each creature blocking it. This would pair really well with that Roar of Challenge and any trample enabler to help end the game quicker with Anzrag as we get into combat. And then Inara gives all of our commanders indestructible on our turn, helping out with that. I think a lot of this deck could come down to your preference on how you want to do it. Whether you want to spin really hard into just the extra combats, whether you want to spin really hard into the trample using more overwhelming stampede type effects. But I think the one thing that is going to help us out the most is getting a critical mass of creatures, using our Xenagos and Halana and Elena type effects to give creatures haste, get in for those big combats, and use things like Morog, or Karlach or Aggravated Assault to take an extra combat at the right time to punish someone for extending or just getting our advantage by power on board and ending the game that way. I think we can build a lot more aggressive Anzrag deck if you really wanted to. That wasn't my goal. It was try to make it a little more rounded. I tend to find with Stompy lists that you want to make sure that you don't just flash in the pan. You want to make sure that you have enough staying power to be able to hit over multiple turns, and I think things like Delina could make fun with Anzrag, allowing us to get multiple copies of it and just having a ton of fun with the board. No, the copies wouldn't count for commander damage, but hey, if you got free copies of 8/4s with Trample, that if you block them, give us extra combats, I think it's going to make the board really tough to deal with Anzrag, and I think it could just be a ton of fun to have happen. Yes, the list is a little chaotic, but I think that's what Anzrag would want. Gruul Stompy, making it chaotic and having good times. Let's get into the playtest. We keep a 2-lander, which to some decks would be not a lot, but we have a Nature's Lore, so we know we're automatically going to get a 3rd land. Anzrag is 4, so sure we're missing one more, but we have things like Garruk's Uprising to draw some cards potentially. Herald of Ilharg is such a cool card from the Clue set. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we put 2 counters on it. If that spell's 5 or greater, it deals damage equal to the number of counters on it to each opponent. It can get pretty darn big if we put it down at the right time. And then we have our boy Ilharg there ready to go. Very Gruul hand with Gulf as well. Makes me really happy. Turn one, we see a Castle Garenbrig. That's killer. That's going to be a great pair up next to this Commercial District, which we're going to put in tapped and Surveil 1. We reveal a Chaos Warp. A great card, not bad idea to have some removal, so I'd say I'd probably keep it on top. And we're going to shuffle our library next turn with this Nature's Lore. Turn 2, I'd put down that Castle Garenbrig. Might as well get it down, and we'll go ahead and go for Nature's Lore. There's plenty of things we can get here. We have multiple lands with dual typing in Sheltered Thicket, Wooded Ridgeline, and I think we have a Stomping Ground in here too. We'll get that Stomping Ground there and tapped. And now turn 4 we would have the Anzrag, if that's what we want to do. Or sorry, turn 3 we would have the Anzrag. Turn 3 we draw an Inara. I don't think I shuffled. Sorry about that. We draw Keswick Wolfrun, great, and the land's very helpful. We'll get that Scarred the Rage Pits down, and I kind of want to, in all reality, try to get another creature down before I get Anzrag down. I know that that delays us a turn on attacking, but it could be good. Also, Garruk's Uprising couldn't be bad, but actually, on second thought, I'm just going to dump the Anzrag. I think it'll pass the turn. It's scary, but nobody's going to use removal yet. Hopefully, our opponents are smart enough to wait until we commit to the board before they do anything. Invasion Plans is a pretty fun spell. An enchantment, each creature blocks whenever able. An attacking player choose how each creature blocks. This can be really beneficial for us having the right things block Anzrag at the right time. We could get that down, but I kind of like getting the Garruk's Uprising down here. When it comes in, we control a creature with power 4 or greater, going to draw us a card, gets us another land for next turn. And we are just 2 mana off of Ghalta, which is another great thing to have. We'll draw for our next turn, get that mountain down. I kind of like the idea of getting the Herald of Ilharg down here, and then that would give us enough to get Ghalta down for just 2 mana. Ilharg gets 2 counters, domes everybody for 2, and maybe we take an attack with Ilharg, or Anzrag. Maybe we try to get it into a player that maybe doesn't... we would draw off the Ghalta. Maybe we try to get Anzrag into somebody that doesn't have creatures, only has a cheap blocker, and then swing it again. Again, my goal wouldn't be to trample here, but just to start pushing some aggressiveness on our opponents. At the end of the day, as a combat deck, we're going to have to win the game by combat, and we can't sit around until someone chooses to remove a creature. Now, what I like about this board state as we go into our next turn is on someone else's turn when they're pinpointing removal. Sure, the Anzrag is probably the obvious thing to remove, but now you have a 12/12 and a 5/5 Herald that are going to become a little bit harder to deal with. And hopefully over the next turn or two, we can make it even worse. Put down that Rockfall Vale. I think now is not a bad time to put down Invasion Plans. Now we got to be careful where we attack now, since every creature is forced to block. But I don't think I mind that. I dumped down the Ilharg. This is going to draw me a card off of the Garruk's Uprising. And then Ilharg will get 2 counters. It was mana value 5 or greater, so it's going to dome somebody for 4. Now we have Trample because Uprising, I mean, we did last turn as well. But again, we have access to Trample now. So even though both these creatures have Trample, Anzrag has Trample, which is the more important part, and we can take a big attack at an opponent, we would have used probably enough mana to keep... Keswick Wolfrun wouldn't be up because it was 5, but we don't mind not attacking with a Hard to Storm. We could take a big attack here, especially with Ghalta being one of our creatures. And this Herald of Ilharg now being a 7/7. Swing the Anzrag at somebody, swing these 2 at somebody else. That's 19 going at somebody else. Trample and the Anzrag going at someone. And we're going to purposely pick a player that Anzrag has something to be blocked by, if possible. If so, we would then unlock another combat. 19 of that damage from Ghalta and Ilharg, Herald of Ilharg going somewhere else. Again, pick a player we can attack with Anzrag to get blocked. And we maybe would end the game straight out here, depending on how many creatures are on board and what the situation is and how we can split up. Probably not, but I think we're going to deal a ton of damage this turn. And if nothing happens to our board next turn, we will for sure have lethal as long as there are creatures on board or we have something to do with our fun. We see a forest there for turn. Having access to 8 mana, if we think about it, we would have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana with the Garenbrig. Plenty enough to get Ilharg down. Ilharg could give Xenagos could give itself haste if it wanted to and make it pretty big. We also have Toski as well. But again here, I would probably get the Xenagos down, draw off the Xenagos, take a big attack. Ilharg puts this O'Hare Chasm that we just drew down, and hitting somebody. And again, if we can pick the right attacks on the right players, we may potentially take 1 or 2 extra combats here and hopefully end the game this turn. Now, yes, this was one example of this deck. We drew some important creatures and made it really good. But again, this is what I talked about with things like Galta and the Chasms and the Atalis, where all you have to do is get these pretty big creatures out that are going to start attacking, that in multiple combats are going to deal a ton of damage. Let me know, what do you think of Anzrag down in the comment section below. This is a deck that made me really happy to brew, made me really happy to play test a couple times, and I look forward to playing an Anzrag against me at some point because this creature's a ton of fun, and I know it's going to surprise some people. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.